Good afternoon and welcome to the Federal Executive Forum celebrating 18 years of profiling excellence in government IT mission programs. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in rolling out zero trust architecture strategies and technologies. With me on today's show are Lamont Yarborough, Chief Information Security Officer at HHS, Ryan Klotz, Deputy Chief Information Officer at the CIA, John Samios, Chief System Security Officer at TSA, Chris Roberts, Federal Engineering Leader, Quest Software, Public Sector, Gary Barlett, Federal Chief Technology Officer at Illumio, and Lamont Copeland, Managing Director, Federal Solutions Architecture at Verizon Business. We're talking about zero trust architecture. The executive order has been out there for quite some time. We've gotten some funding, some additional guidance from OMB, and now it's time to execute. I know you all have been. Lamont, why don't you talk about kicking us off about the journey you all are on at HHS?
First and foremost, I guess I should highlight that HHS is a large and highly federated organization. Our components vary in size, maturity, architecture, mission. So this kind of poses a unique challenge to implementing something like zero trust, but we feel that we're making great headway. So HHS is making progress in executing its strategy and its implementation plan. We formed a zero trust working group with representation from each element within HHS to share successes and challenges and identify opportunities where different areas of the department can address shared requirements together. So with respect to our HHS components, we call them operational divisions. We've made advances in a number of areas, some of which cloud-based identity, credential, and access management, or ICAM, properly aligned, secure access services, SASE, which helps us to eliminate legacy VPNs. We've implemented SOARs to enable automation of enterprise threat mitigation and incident response activities. We've transitioned to HTTPS for all HTTP traffic and preloading all .gov domains as HTTPS only in web browsers. So there's different areas of the department. We're at various levels, again, due to our complexity and our levels of maturity with respect to our zero trust network architectures. But many have conducted gap assessments to identify priority areas, and the department is working this year to baseline progress against our implementation plan to support, future initiatives most effectively.
No question, it's an architecture. No question, HHS, a significantly large agency with huge operating entities underneath of it. So I applaud all the work that's going on there. Ryan, I know that the CIA has been on a tear as far as transformation. You've been right in the middle of that, and I'm sure that this zero trust architecture is an important element of that. Tell us about the state of the status to what's happening over there.
Yeah, I think here at CIA, we've really been on this journey for a long time. It wasn't called zero trust. That's sort of a more recent term. But the ideas that serve as the foundation for zero trust architecture are things that we've been doing for a long time. The idea of least privilege access, the idea of network segmentation, robust audit and monitoring, secure identity, management have all been foundational to how we deliver IT services to a very complex, agile, global set of requirements at CIA. We've made a lot of progress rolling out multi-factor authentication across not only our general user population, but in particular focused on our privileged admins, our most vulnerable sort of resources. We've done a lot of work in the cloud offerings, really leading, I think, in the federal space in that regard, which serves as a foundational capability to implement many of the elements of zero trust, but really reorganized ourselves as well. Really bringing together the elements of our IT enterprise under our CIO, our data activities under our Chief Data Officer, and our Chief Information Security Officer all now reside together within our digital directorate, the Directorate of Digital Innovation. And really that cohesive organizational leadership and prioritization approach has allowed us to really put a lot of focus on many of the elements of our zero trust architecture. And so I think we've really sort of increased our velocity The executive order 14028, as you mentioned, really has given us kind of a focus and a cohesion around the idea of zero trust. And I think work to continue to develop the basic maturity models and the goalposts that we will sort of target to continue to measure success against the implementation of a ZTA.
Yeah, I always call it sounds like a lot of fantastic work over there, including the restructuring organizationally. I'm sure that's increased the velocity. No question that it's a journey, right? Are we ever there? We're not sure about that. It's certainly a journey as we evolve in the implementation of this architecture. John, how about over at TSA? A lot of great work going on over there, a lot of very innovative things going on in the airports. No question that this architecture framework has been introduced just in time.
Yeah, it has, and it's been an interesting way that we're trying to develop it as new technologies become available, as we go through our demonstration processes to flesh out all of the functional requirements that make sure that things work in the way they're supposed to, but then also building in that cybersecurity. I think where Zero Trust is really trying to build it in from cradle to grave. Here at TSA, we've made a lot of great successes, but we still have a long way to go. I'm sure everybody else is probably in the same boat. We've tried to leverage as much as we can from the DHS Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, CDM.
Mm-hmm.
It really helps us with a lot of things that have already been pre-defined and set up for us, from credential management and privilege management, for the most part using the PIV credential smart card for our authentication. We're still working on different ways to include authentication from the general public, because we do have to interface with people for sure. But it also helps us with a lot of our inventory management. And the big areas where we need to work on is on our network segmentation. Get rid of flat networks anywhere they may exist, segment things so that we can better control and contain things. And then the data tagging, right? That's always been I've been in doing this for quite a while. That's always been a challenge. Encrypting data is one thing, but to be able to tag it correctly, to put it in its right buckets and for the access controls is always a big challenge. So right now we're working with teams to identify what we need to do, define what it means to be successful, the metrics, coming up with good quality metrics so we can say, hey, we actually made it, we got there. And then we can see from a percentage point. I mean, you already brought it up, you never really reach the end goal, but I look at it as half-lives. Can I half it and keep halving it till I'm virtually at the end state? So,
yeah, it's a goalpost, a North Star, whatever you want to call it there, as far as an architecture, a framework, so that as you're pulling technology out and inserting new technology, it's all sort of dovetails into this architecture, this framework that we're all trying to strive for. Chris, how about at Quest in regards to what you're seeing across the state? You have a perfect opportunity to sort of see things from a perspective of multi-agencies, et cetera. Give us a perspective.
Sure. I mean, Quest Software, we've been in the public sector space for almost 30 years. And the journey for us started when we had conversations with customers around the older models. So TSCC, the old C2 model, for instance, Orange Book that later became, what we have today with
Orange Book. You're going old school on us.
Going old school. Sorry. So
no problem.
Not enough gray hair today. But what I have learned over the years is that the centralized moats that we used to put around our kingdoms don't exist anymore. Yeah. And one thing that both, Ryan and John and Lamonte, actually John and Lamonte more so talked about, that federated enterprise where you have multiple locations, you have multiple data centers, for instance. And the minute we all went home during the pandemic, it really highlighted the fact that all of a sudden my endpoints became critically important. So we started to have conversations with customers around, do you understand exactly where your data is? So that data tagging issue that John talked about is very important. Do you understand every user and every endpoint? But the fourth pillar that I always find interesting to discuss is, do you actually understand the application APIs that are being called by all the various applications that are being downloaded to smart devices or even workstations, and what's being used in the browser? What are those browsers applications that you've been connecting to, even though it's a secure HTTP. What are they actually connecting to? I was doing a talk yesterday, and I made the point that 46% of S3 buckets were found to be improperly configured, for instance. So if you're in a private network and you're connecting to an external application, you don't know where that data is ending up and where it's being cycled, for instance. And even if you've tagged it internally, what happens when it goes outside your network? That's a whole nother series of issues. So we help our customers, and we've been talking about focusing more on the APIs, those endpoints, the users, for instance, and specifically data, to help them flush out that zero trust architecture. And the ultimate data source that we find that needs to be tagged, quite frankly, is AD, Active Directory, which we all take for granted. And we just assume that it's a secure, bulletproof platform. And we keep forgetting that it is the ultimate database within our zero trust architectures. And it's something we help customers focus on as well.
A lot of pieces, a lot of elements to this architecture, no question about that. Gary, how about at Illumio? What are you seeing across the ecosystem here?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So we have really seen a significant uptick in progress in the federal government specifically. And I applaud the gentlemen that are online here today for their efforts in trying to advance zero trust. We have seen, in the commercial sector, they have been talking about, and again, to the point of was it called zero trust or not? But they have probably been a little more ahead of the curve a little bit in some areas. Obviously, they've got financial things that they've got to worry about and those types of business impacts. But we've seen government agencies really starting to pick up the pace on trying to really attack this whole concept of zero trust. One of the things we at Illumio find interesting is we are trying to introduce new ways of looking at things. And Chris touched on a little bit when you think about, oftentimes we think about these, remote entities and trying to draw big ring fences around them. And really people don't understand necessarily their applications and what are their applications doing? What are their applications talking to? In this world of low code, no code, and the way that applications often are thrown together, trying to rapidly deploy applications, sometimes we don't really understand how our applications are communicating. And we like to try to help entities understand exactly what applications are doing, what they're reaching out to, what they're touching, and how do you allow what you need to allow, but lock down what you don't need to allow.
Bingo. Yeah, I was going to point out, and the authorization of that application to do what it's doing, despite the awareness or maybe not. Lamont, tell me about what Verizon is seeing in regards to progress for zero trust.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. And we're seeing great progress from the government on how we're going to be going through this journey. As you said before, there's a journey that this is going on, but what's also defined in all these documentation and things that we're using to do development and to do solutioning around is there's a clear destination and understand and expected outcomes that we're going. As you guys recently saw, CISA just released the second version of their zero trust maturity model, which is a good guidance and collaboration with the industry to help us understand, help the government decide how we're going to meet these different metrics and different target levels, but also how we as industry are going to be able to develop and be able to bring solutions to them to be able to solve for zero trust. As you saw, all these documentations from the DoD, from what the Office of the National Security, Cybersecurity Director, from the CISA, they're all aligning. They're all providing clear guidance. They're all providing us how we should be developing our solutions, how we then should be able to start partnering, integrating all of our solutions together too as well, because this is not going to be one solution that covers the full gambit of the zero trust. So for me, for example, here at Verizon, it helps to guide me looking at the target levels on how do I build network security inside of the network from the wireline standpoint and also from the 5G, from how I'm building authentication security in there, how I'm building threat management inside of my product to be able to deliver that, how I'm also building in software-defined networking to be able to help with that micro segmentation that the government's looking to be able to do to manage how the traffic is supported. Also how I'm handling managed services too as well. There's a huge part of visibility and understanding those assets. As Chris said, data is spreading. It's not a moat anymore. It's wherever that user is, wherever it needs to be. That's where that security also needs to be too as well. So it helps us figure out how do we then provide that visibility so that we can protect and get ahead of that threat. But then also, help with identifying and mitigating and collaborating so we can then also work in different areas of the network. And then finally, it helps us also to figure out how, again, we all partner together. So we like no one vendor is going to be able to provide all the services. So how do I know what I need to target, what I need to be able to, who I need to partner with to integrate, and how we can then provide those end-to-end outcomes to be able to support the zero trust architecture.
Absolutely. And no question, the guards, gates, and locks play is no longer the play. Ryan, we're going to talk about specific programs. You top-lined a lot of them there. And it's not just one program, Zero Trust Architecture. It is an architecture. But do you want to take a specific entity and highlight it for the audience?
Yeah, sure. I think I mentioned in my earlier response, CIA has really led the way in a lot of regards in the implementation of cloud technologies. All the way back to 2014, the launch of the Commercial Cloud Services or C2S program, now the Commercial Cloud Enterprise or C2E program, delivering a foundational capability necessary to implement many of the elements of the Zero Trust architecture. Chris had mentioned, right, the 46% of S3 buckets unsecured. Unfortunately, the cloud gives you the ability to implement elements of zero trust, but it does take humans to put those building blocks together to configure them effectively to be compliant and secure. But the cloud does provide you those building blocks. All the cloud providers provide you identity and access management to discreetly define roles and functions that those roles can perform. It provides you network segmentation. The concept of virtual private clouds allows you to build a secure network layer around applications or services to prevent sort of inherited risk across network boundaries. The cloud is infinitely auditable. All the actions that occur within the cloud and its infrastructure, because it's really software-defined infrastructure, all of those actions and activities are auditable, and giving your cyber defenders information necessary to understand what's happening across your infrastructure and take necessary actions when things don't seem right. And foundationally, it includes the ability to encrypt data both at rest and in transit. So we've made a lot of progress there. Started with one, now with the Commercial Cloud Enterprise, really implementing a multi-cloud approach to put in the hands of our mission partners a diverse set of technologies and tools to drive mission capabilities. But foundationally, it also enables us to build more secure systems and improve our compliance against the zero trust architecture.
Yeah, no question, when you get into a complex multi-cloud environment like that, this architecture really comes into play. So I applaud all the work that's going on over there. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We are talking about zero trust architectures, and we're talking about specific programs that we'd like to highlight. Chris, I'm going to throw it over to you. Can you give us an example of a program that Quest has been working with to highlight in regards to ZTA?
Sure. We've been working with several large agencies, both in DoD and civilian. The most recent one we had was a very, very large civilian agency, and they were a highly federated network. So when we say highly federated, not just, on the continental United States, but OCONUS as well. So they had global outposts and global locations, bases, and commands. And they realized that if they wanted to do anything close to zero trust, getting a handle on a source of truth for who did what, where, and when was going to be their first priority. And I love being able to put a customer in the cloud. I love cloud architecture. But the reality is there are a lot of forward posts, quite frankly, that still have some physical component, be it AD, be it a database of some sort, an application hub, for instance, or a network hub. And to move those to the cloud in a one-step lift and shift, God forbid, is very difficult. So they realized that they had to start consolidating and clean up, so to speak, all the years of identity proliferation. When I say identity proliferation, we know what we're talking about, like how many the domain admins, super users, the people that are just so used to sudo to basically set up configure a printer. I don't need God privileges to set up a printer, for instance. I don't need God privileges to set up a network router, for instance. So they had to go in and start cleaning up. So we helped them understand exactly where all those assets were, what those individuals were capable of doing currently, for instance, because 9 times out of 10, when an attacker comes after a network, they want to find a soft point on a domain or a server that has privileged levels of security, for instance. So we help them consolidate those things, crunch that into a single domain or single forest, reduce the number of actual users who had elevated privilege. And for those that still had elevated privileges, give them a just-in-time privilege access. That is, if you need to do a specific function, then you have that privilege for that particular function, for that particular time, from that particular location. And then we pull it back. And yes, politically, there was a lot of hand-wringing. There was a lot of, but I need this. I gotta have this. And once you put it into practice, it realized that, you know what? They had a much more secure footprint. They started to understand that zero trust, one, not an application, but they started to understand how the principles could be applied and how it would impact the network operations moving forward and how much more secure they started to become once they deployed it in those specific locations.
Yeah, the judicious nature always pays off. And we appreciate the example there. Lamont, Yarborough, you talked about the complexity of HHS. No question, just a daunting task at a cabinet level there with so many significant moving parts. But can you give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight where you've been on this journey to implement this architecture?
Sure. So with DHS's help through the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, I believe some of my colleagues here also mentioned them. HHS has deployed a cloud-based endpoint detection and response solution, or EDR, at almost every operational division, enabling more comprehensive visibility into the security posture of assets across the department. So through this deployment, we've reduced the network attack surface by leveraging default denial, allow by exception firewall rules. We've provided threat surface reduction to USBs and external media. We've enabled ZTA scoring on each endpoint. We've deployed next generation AI and ML, preventative antivirus, automated threat intelligence through our SOAR. So HHS is preparing to expand the capabilities of deployed EDR agents across the department, to include an identity module to provide more contextual awareness and conditional access controls based on identity and device attributes. And we're also supporting the deployment of the EDR agent to mobile GFD devices. And so many operational divisions are preparing to extend protections to cloud workloads across AWS and Azure.
Significant effort there. I'm just curious for the listening audience here, just roughly how big is HHS employee-wise?
Employee-wise, I don't know if it's a hard and fast number, but I tend to go with approximately 90,000 feds, and I believe this is many contractors.
Wow. So large. Yes. By all measures, no question about that. Gary, how about at Illumio? Can you give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight?
Sure. So we've been working with several agencies and some DoD components, helping them with application security, right? And understanding what their applications are doing, identifying what their applications should be doing, because those are two completely different things, what they're doing and what they should be doing.
What you think they're doing, yeah.
And what you think they're doing, exactly, right? So visualizing those communications and those connection points, and helping agencies understand that, when you think about the whole concept of zero trust, one of those concepts is, what happens after the breach, right? It's not a matter of if, but when people are going to get breached, and trying to minimize the impact of a breach. So we've been working with agencies to help them understand that, hey, if something gets compromised inside your enterprise, how do you, as fast as possible, contain that breach and ensure that they don't have unfettered access across your enterprise, kind of in that east-west, lateral movement? Because many enterprises, right now in the federal government, they're kind of like the Tootsie Pop, right? They're hard on the outside, but very soft on the inside. And we're really trying to help federal agencies harden themselves internally so that when there is a compromise, the impact of that compromise, kind of that blast radius, as it were, is minimized as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's what's the beauty of this architecture. So many different variables, everything from the identity management, the application stuff that you're talking about there, to all the cloud capabilities that Ryan was describing, the instrumentation associated to that. Lots of pieces and parts here that make this ecosystem work. John, how about at TSA? I know you all have some nifty programs going on over there, but let's talk about your implementation of ZTA and a program you'd like to highlight.
So I think what I would like to highlight or say that we're doing very well with is our migration to the cloud. But it's a double-edged sword, because that's really replacing, the server or data center portion of what we need to connect and interconnect. We really have more of a hybrid environment, and it's going to remain that way probably forever, because the sensors and the devices that we're using to, clear passengers and clear luggage, they're at airports scattered all over the U.S.
Sure.
And a lot of the stuff is dealing with very large images. So it's really difficult to take those images, send them back to the cloud, do any kind of processing, and then send it back to the airport. So a lot of things have to be done locally. But where we can take advantage of the cloud, and I think we've done a pretty good job of that, we've been very, very successful. I think it was Ryan that was bringing up some of the things that you kind of automatically get when you go to the cloud with some of the virtualization, some of the network segmentation, the ease of implementing a single based authentication mechanism, which really goes a long way with the identity part. Some of the areas that, surprisingly enough, become more difficult with the cloud, and didn't realize this going in, but we kind of learned this as we've gone along. You would think that the software inventory would be more straightforward, because it's a set. You would think it's a set number of types of software that would be involved. But with the introduction of a lot of the PaaS and SaaS opportunities that you have with the app stores and the development and the ease of development, it's very easy for developers to go in and start bringing things in and using those as part of their application. So keeping track of that and inventorying that can be a little bit of a challenge. But then the other part of it is the application workload changes drastically, because I think somebody earlier brought up, how do you track all the different APIs and make sure that they're going and to the right locations that you think they're connecting with, and how does that authentication, or authorization between systems, stay in the realm of what you thought it was, and is it behaving correctly? So it's a double-edged sword, kind of, but I think our migration to the cloud has been our biggest success.
Fantastic, and we really applaud all the efforts that's going on there. Lamont, when you look at the successful Zero Trust program, what qualities do you see? What characteristics are working for government agencies from Verizon's perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I mean, a lot of this is coming from the collaboration and what we're seeing and how this works, and taking a full view of this journey that we're all on, and how we're looking at it, not just from the technology itself and how it's we need to be able to leverage that into the environment, but how do you then look at it from the culture, the processes, the people, because all these things are elements which need to be able to change and be part of this journey to be able to make sure that we're successfully deploying and getting these things into that environment. Because if you're not able to look at how the culture is going to be adapt to that, how do we then adapt all of our processes and our planning, how we handle the budgeting that's going to happen into here, then it'll be a lot of really cool technology that's not going to be able to be leveraged properly to be able to support this. We're seeing a lot of really good things happening with this, is not only how do we work together from the vendor and the customer side of the standpoint, but how this is also proliferating into multiple segments of the American community as well. We're seeing a lot of how this is Zero Trust architecture, how do these standards be filtered into the place like the defense industrial base? How do we see it being filtered into the critical infrastructure? And how do we then leverage this even down to the American people? Because as we all know, there's the president has out the Infrastructure Fund Act, which has, getting broadband everywhere. That's including small businesses, end users, the government itself. How do we make sure that everybody has that equal access, equal connectivity? But on top of that, these executive orders are also making sure that not only trying to get this out there, but how do we make sure that we're securing that and everyone has the responsibility of taking that security and making sure that we're protecting all the assets and all the data that we have that's going across the nation. So, I mean, there's a lot of really good work that's going on with how do we then, work together, look at this full zero trust journey as an end-to-end view from technology, people, processes, and then how do we make sure that there, it's working not just for the federal government, but for the federal government, all the pieces of the nation that it's touching, so that we're protecting our state.
Yeah, people don't think about culture, but it is a big piece of this. I know you all can appreciate that and have encountered that. We're going to start talking about priorities, and I'm going to throw it up to you, Lamont Yarborough at HHS. Tell us about your top 2 or 3 priorities for this year in regards to your zero trust architecture journey.
Thanks, Luz. So some of HHS's focus areas are, include researching and testing solutions, some of which like, data discovery, classification and encryption, or always encrypted DNS, or phishing resistant external multi-factor authentication, software defined network. So we're going to spend a lot of time, again, doing a lot of research and testing potential solutions. And then we'll also continue to measure zero trust maturity of systems based on the CISA maturity model to help us determine immediate opportunities to increase maturity and systemic changes necessary to the organization. So through the efforts of our HHS Zero Trust Working Group, we plan to identify unfunded requirements, common to all areas across the department, and help us to evaluate solutions to achieve, greater cost avoidance through HHS's combined buying power.
A nice tight list of priorities there. I know there's a lot of moving parts to this. Chris, how about at Quest? Can you give us sort of what's the demand signal coming from from your agencies in regards to the priorities, and what are you all focusing on right now?
Sure. We've seen an uptick, quite frankly, in the thirst for addressing zero trust as a whole, but just realizing that there are so many different components. So there are about 7 layers of zero trust. You can vendor shop until you're blue in the face, and it can get very exhausting. So Lamont's right, researching, evaluating, determining your internal requirements, because every agency is different, before you start investing and rolling out a particular solution. For us, our priorities really are what I call fighting legacy identity. And what I simply mean by that is that so many times that the applications that we were talking about, John hit on this, Gary definitely hit on this with the application low code, no code, is that a developer writes a piece of software, goes to a desktop or a mobile device, and all of a sudden that application inherits, for instance, my privilege, whatever that may be, for instance, but that may not be the proper privilege for the application. So in this case, it's an application, but think of all those devices and endpoints. Do you really want them inheriting or using the legacy identity of the person who initiated that particular session? You really have to start thinking about session security or access management in context of what the purpose of that application is. What is the purpose of that traffic? I think Lamont hit it earlier about HTTPS across this entire enterprise, and segmentation is very important. So do you actually have the right to do what you're doing, even though you've got that legacy identity? So it's part of the conversation we have with our customers around zero trust. That is, yes, we'll help you do the logging, we'll help you do session management, and we'll do behavioral analytics all day long. But at the end of the day, you've got to understand exactly, do you have the right privilege for the right device and the right application on the particular network segment that we're talking about?
Critical piece of the element there of securing your environment. Ryan, how about at CIA? Top 2 or 3 priorities for you this year?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, it's about just continued movement forward, going from basic to intermediate and advanced maturity across our implementation of the various elements of our zero trust architecture. Top 2 or 3. First rule of cybersecurity is know all the things, right? And I think it starts with an accurate inventory of assets and systems. Know what's on your network, know how it's configured, know its state, and by default, then it's vulnerabilities. So continued development of an authoritative a configuration management database that is used not only for IT operations, but also for cybersecurity. So that's probably first. And the second is further refinement and development of capabilities around data analytics. Again, both from a performance and operations perspective for IT, but also in operational cybersecurity and defense, right? We collect a lot of data across all of our systems. Unfortunately, we're not able to operationalize all that data as quickly and effectively as we need to inform our cyber defenders as quickly as possible. And so how do we take advantage of the data we collect, advanced data analytics, which then drives you into the automation and orchestration and automated remediation of cyber vulnerabilities. So that's really kind of the second one, is really further refinement and improvement of our operational cybersecurity posture.
Very crisp set of direction there. So we love it. Lamont Copeland, Verizon, what are you seeing in regards to the top priorities there? And how is Verizon working to help government meet their zero trust mandates and priorities?
Yeah, no, thanks, Luke. Yeah, and as you all know, we're very much moving in, trying to help support the government be able to be mobility and move around, be able to do the work wherever they are, wherever they need to be, providing in 5G services, be able to use drones, be able to help public safety, to be able to get data and information wherever they need to be, wherever they're working at that time. But what's key part about that, and Ryan just touched upon it, is you need to know where all your assets are, know what they are, know what they're doing, know where your data is residing. So one of the things that we're making sure that we're working with the government on is how do they understand what their footprint is, where everything is, and how to then manage that, how to support that. So then you know how to secure it. So when I'm introducing the mobility aspect, all the edge computing elements to be able to support that data closer toward the user in the field, I'm able to then start layering in different elements of security, building in threat management inside of our network, building in threat management inside of the edge computing services to make sure that we're keeping threats out, building in authentication services to ensure that, you know, who's supposed to be where is in the proper space and have access to the proper data. Also building in, eventually when it does get here for us, is building in network slicing so that we can then put that prioritization across there, protecting that data so that you not only have the performance that you're looking for, but you're also having that security as well. So that when you're, as I'm a public safety first responder, I'm in that field, I know that, hey, I'm getting my data, I'm able to get situational awareness, but it's also secure information so I can transmit information back and forth between commands and posts and be able to then quickly do what is necessary to meet the mission set. So a lot of that is really us trying to make sure that we're looking at that different layers of security from the network side, from the segmentation, and then layering in all the things from authentication, from the VPN, the software defined elements, and then also ensuring that the compute and that data itself is encrypted and managed appropriately. So helping to move forward the mobility aspects of what the government needs so that they can complete the mission regardless of wherever you're at.
And we really appreciate the positioning there to enable these very sophisticated capabilities. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We are talking about zero trust architecture. We are talking about priorities. And John, I'm going to throw it over to you. Top 2 priorities for TSA this year in regards to the implementation of ZTA.
So I would have to say it's really 3. It's definition, requirements, and then metrics. And the reason I say that is we need to be able to define what is going to be required for each of the 5 pillars, and then also each of the 5 or the 3 steps for each of those as well, for measuring our success, and to really put it in a cohesive enterprise posture so that we can make sure that if I go to my chief information security officer and I say we're secure and here's how confident I am, there can be something behind it that is true quality evidence to show that we're meeting that mark. Requirements are very important because we're constantly refreshing equipment, especially at airports, and some of this equipment is very, very expensive and takes a long time for that procurement process from the time you start it until it actually shows up at an airport. And then it's there for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. So it's defining those requirements to build in the zero trust early so that by the time we actually get the equipment, it's already there, and then it becomes just a matter of integrating it into our solutions and doing the configuration of it. But more importantly, at the end of that, and I kind of started the conversation here with this, is the metrics. How do I measure success? Do I do it by each of the individual 5 pillars? Yes, I'm meeting pillars 1, 3, 5, and 4 and 5, but versus I'm meeting all 5. But at what level am I meeting each of those pillars? So it's very important to understand, is it just traditional? Am I doing true orchestration? Do I have the optimal solutions for each of those? And the problem, and this has been brought up by several others earlier, there is no single solution. There is no silver bullet. A lot of vendors might like to tell you that, they have buy this and it'll do all your zero trust, but in reality, it won't, especially in hybrid environments. So I would say there's 3.
Fantastic. And you're absolutely right. It's a constellation of technologies brought together to implement this capability that we're all striving for. Gary, how about at Illumio? Give us your top priority that you're focusing on.
So one of the things that we're really focusing on is helping federal agencies understand that as good and as much as I appreciate the architectures that are putting out, one of the concerns about, from our perspective, is they have this tendency to break things down into these, the basic, the intermediary, and then the advanced capabilities. And agencies have a tendency to get kind of fixated on, they have to do things in an order. And they get fixated on, maybe some of the basic things that they're continuously trying to get 100% resolution on. So let's pick identity. We've been chasing identity since as long as I've been in the IT world. And, we've never solved identity. We're never going to completely 100% solve identity. Technology is going to change. The things that we put in place today that we think we're going to have 100% secure identity is going to suddenly not be as secure tomorrow. So we've been working with federal agencies to understand that you need to be focusing on all of the pillars and not get so fixated on a particular pillar or a particular capability inside a pillar, and ask yourself again, what happens not if, but when a breach occurs, right? And what kind of safety factors do you have built into your internal network? I like to use an analogy. Not too long ago, I was in a bad car accident. My car had all the advanced safety features, auto braking, all sorts of technology that was supposed to stop me from getting in an accident. I still got in an accident that totaled my vehicle. However, thankfully, my vehicle manufacturer hadn't given up on this idea of what happens after the accident. So I had seatbelt and airbags inside my vehicle. The fact that despite all the technology that was there that was supposed to prevent the accident, they still had something inside my vehicle after the accident occurred that was there to protect me and minimize the amount of damage that I took as the person inside the car. Too many enterprises today are so focused on the technology to prevent an accident that they don't have the technology to ask, how do we minimize the impact of the accident? And that's really what we've been encouraging. And we've seen some CIOs that are really starting to wake up to the fact that they shouldn't just be judged on, do they stop a breach from occurring, but how well do they deal with the breach and minimize the breach after it occurs?
Very good catch, and we really do appreciate you highlighting that. All right, we're going to do a turbo round here. We're going to do one top lesson learned. Lamont Yarborough, you've been landing 747s over at DHS, now at HHS. Got a lot of moving parts there, a lot of experience. Top lesson learned for the community as you've gone on this journey.
Sure. And I'm probably not breaking any new ground in saying this, but
that's okay.
Zero Trust is a complex, extremely comprehensive and game-changing architecture, right? I think Gary spoke to the complexities of the identity pillar, which is true, but the data pillar we find is also very challenging because, especially as a highly federated agency, it's practically impossible to start by trying to inventory all of our data. So instead, we focus on getting an accurate count of identities and devices, always focusing on how they interact with the data that we need to protect. And fortunately, we have many subject matter experts doing excellent work in many areas of the department, and we've been fortunate enough to create an atmosphere of collaboration through the Zero Trust Working Group and through virtual event platforms like department-wide tech exchanges, where we can hear success stories, learn from them, and benefit from each other's experiences.
Fantastic. Really do appreciate it. Ryan, you're in a very sophisticated global environment there, and you've implemented some capability that a lot of agencies are still thinking about doing. top lesson learned that you'd like to impart some wisdom on this community as you've gone on this journey?
Yeah, sure. I think it's about making sure your organizational priorities align to a zero trust architecture. As I mentioned before, I think we have aligned our organizational construct with our CIO, our CISO, and our chief data officer, our CDO, and what we affectionately call our digital C-suite in our digital directorate, and putting those elements together, focused on identity, infrastructure, security, and data, allows us to really focus on prioritization, resource alignment, resource investment against our objectives on zero trust architecture in a disparate sort of organizational construct that is a lot harder. And I think the biggest lessons learned for us is that we have seen great success in acceleration and implementation of zero trust principles and objectives by having sort of that organizational construct. Our digital C-suite really help drive out sort of organizational priorities around this architecture.
Good advice for those that are looking to embark into this journey. John, a lot of sophisticated equipment at these airports that you described. Tell us about top lesson learned.
Well, I think it's all about getting senior leadership buy-in, as Ryan was just saying. Also, it's not that you shouldn't be aware that you have gaps. Everybody has gaps because we're never 100% on any one of the pillars. But don't be afraid of finding those gaps, and then find solutions to mitigate as much as you can to fill those gaps in. We thought we were pretty strong in our hardware and software inventories just based on our CDM implementations. We found that there are some gaps. And then once you know that there's an issue, you can quickly then go identify solutions to try to clean that up. So it's been very eye-opening. In that a lot of people like to say, well, zero trust really isn't anything new. It's just more fidelity and things we've always done all along. There's some truth to that, but there's also a good lesson here in that you may not be as good as you think you are. And by doing this and looking in greater granularity at each of the different pillars and the solutions you have in place, you're going to find gaps and you're going to find ways to fix it, which overall makes your security posture stronger.
And that's just the reality of the world we're working in. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up, and we always like to wrap it up with sort of painting a picture of the future, if you will. Lamont, we're going to start with you at Verizon and ask you to just share your vision of the future. You know, what's it going to look like 1 to 3 years? You know, what's in the sort of, not the petri dish, but outside the petri dish, the demand signal that you are looking at in regards to zero trust architecture and the innovation around that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Luke. And it was great to be on this panel with everyone. Great conversation. There's going to be a lot more, I think, when we're talking through this space of for security, is how we start incorporating some of these things now, like AI and generative AI, and how do we leverage these things to quickly identify these threats, to be able to model these threats, to be able to use these things, to be able to help train a lot of the solutions and things that we have today. I know there's a lot of back and forth conversation about how AI is going to be used, what's the security of it. But a lot of that is, if you take off the tinfoil hats and look at this, where hopefully there's not going to be a Skynet coming on and with the AI stuff that we're all talking about. But really, how do we then take that and use this information to be able to quickly assimilate a lot of the things that we have and start pulling that and using this to be able to then develop stronger security solutions, to be able to develop stronger insights and be able to develop more and stronger ways to be able to protect and secure our infrastructures. And then we're seeing it now, but also then the inclusion of quantum security and how that's going to be then put into place, how the quantum encryption is going to be used. I know there's a lot of vendors and people, and we're also as well working on how do we then put in more quantum encryption into our networks, how we then develop things for VPNs to be able to run across there, which will leverage those quantum random number generators to be able to then say, okay, how do I get ready for the eventual inclusion of the quantum aspect of this? So, those are a couple of things I see that are not too far in the distant future, but are definitely things which will be helping to build upon and develop what we're going to be doing for the cyber landscape and adding it to zero trust.
And we really do appreciate you pointing those out. Gary, how about Illumio? What's it going to look like 2 to 3 years from now?
I think 2 to 3 years from now, we're going to see more and more focus on a security that is closer and closer to the source of the problem, right? And by that, I mean, when you think about end devices, you think about whether it's physical, virtual servers, containers, where the information actually lives, where the processes are occurring, and trying to get localized security at each one of those points, because those are the points of entry, right? That's how, people, one thing gets compromised, then they jump from point to point to point, right? So really getting that security at the closest point where entry occurs and where that movement jumps from point to point, and really focusing security at the smallest, the smallest common denominator possible. I think that's where we're seeing security head.
Very good point, and we certainly look forward to that. Chris, how about at Quest Software? What's it look like 2 to 3 years from now from Quest's point of view?
So Gary had an interesting point. Secure today doesn't mean secure tomorrow. Things are going to change drastically. Yesterday's science fiction is tomorrow's science fact. I know this because as a kid, I watched Star Trek, watched them pull out that communicator and went, beam me up, Scotty. And yeah, Lamont, that's Verizon StarTech. Okay. We assume that the architectures we're laying down today are going to keep us safe. And quite frankly, we're starting to see things that are quite frightening. And since Lamont also brought up Skynet, Rise of the Machines, remember, there was a malware that started attacking the global network, and their secret weapon was literally Skynet to go attack the malware. Well, we know how that story ended. And for us, we think, oh, that's just too far-fetched. It's not. Recently, they announced a piece of malware by a group called Black Mamba that uses polymorphic malware. And what they simply did was they would inject pieces of their code into your network that did not have the signature of any known virus. And once on your network, it would assemble itself by using ChatGPT calls to recreate the malware and create a brand new binary inside your network. And earlier I mentioned the idea of legacy identity or inherited identity, for instance, and that being a problem. That is, now that malware is on your quote unquote secure segmented network in a form that you don't recognize, and it's just worming its way through your organization. That's the scary part of the future. So I think when Lamont was talking about quantum encryption, for instance, and all the things we're trying to work on and sort of like surround all these potential threats, that is something that we have to keep in mind. That is, the future is continually evolving. But ironically, if we look at the landscape today, we have enough clues. They just laid out in front of us to just follow them and start to implement systems that can basically be just as adaptive to what's coming at us, because the future is not going to wait for us. It's going to happen, and it's actually happening right now. And quite frankly, it's exciting at the same time. It's also frightening. But final point, Terminator is the precursor to the Matrix. And if you don't believe me, go Google that, and that'll basically make your weekend.
I really do appreciate that. John, how about at TSA? 2 to 3 years from now, you're on this cloud transition journey, et cetera. What are you expecting to see 2 to 3 years from now in your environment?
Well, I expect that we'll have a stronger cybersecurity posture overall as we implement zero trust across the board, both in our hybrid environment, so things that are on-prem versus and things that are in the cloud. It's easier, at least it has been to this point, to defend at the edges. Now we need to look inside, and how do we stop lateral movements? It's been brought up, we have AI and quantum computing that can be used to help us with some of the tools we have to monitor that, contain it, and react to it. But it can also be used against us. And it can happen, especially with quantum computing, can happen very, very quickly. And with the encryption that's going to be changing in the very near future, it's going to be harder and harder to see what's coming at you. It's just encrypted packets. So how do I stop it? But I think if we implement zero trust across the board, we can harden ourselves to the point where we'll be somewhat resistant to it. And then with segmentation, we want to be able to quickly contain things and segment them off. If we lose 1 or 2 soldiers, okay. Not ideal, but okay, we just don't want to lose the entire army.
Gotcha. And just sort of protect that blast zone. Ryan, 2 to 3 years from now, you'll have retired C2S and you'll have fully realized C2E, I would imagine. You've got a nice spiffy digital organization, well-oiled machine at that point. What does it look like at the CIA in your domain 2 to 3 years from now?
Yeah, I think from an IT enterprise perspective, like our vision is to enable our mission through dynamic, agile, and secure capabilities. I think it's super important for us to think about sort of a balanced triangle between performance, capability, and security. And I think, zero trust is part of that, is foundational part of that security arm of that triangle. But it can't. It needs to maintain organizational agility so that we can empower our analysts to have access to the data when they need it to make the real-time decisions. And so, like, how do you create sort of that balance between performance, capability, security? That's really, I think, where we're going to be spending a lot of time, a lot of conversations across our enterprise elements, security, and our mission partners to ensure we're delivering those capabilities that they need to be successful, but we're doing it securely, to protect kind of our interests and by default, the interests of the nation. And so that's really, I think, where we're going to be seeing a lot of conversation in the next 2 or 3 years about finding that appropriate balance between performance, capability, and security.
Speed of mission, very key. We really appreciate everything that you all are doing over there. Lamont, wrap us up here. HHS 2 to 3 years from now, what are you expecting that environment to look like?
I think it's kind of hard to, predetermine how technology will progress, but, I'm kind of in agreement with most of my colleagues here with their prior comments with respect to post-quantum cryptography. Kind of looking forward to reading the NIST guidance with respect to that, because it will most likely have significant implications on the legacy systems we still rely on. So, in support of, the executive guidance or in 2302, agencies should, conduct some level of post-quantum readiness assessment on their, on their HVAs or their high value assets, and then create a funding assessment that includes replacing systems that can't support post-quantum computing. So while I don't necessarily predict that, quantum computers will be, a ubiquitous threat within the next 3 years, but preparing for that reality will be a much more prevalent topic of discussion, I believe.
We really do appreciate that and look forward to that. I want to thank all of today's guests for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us on this program and fighting the good fight and keeping this country safe and allowing everyone to prosper. So I really do appreciate that. And I'd like to thank the folks, sponsors here that are supporting us on the show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make this program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.